Hi, everybody. This is Rich Dandliker. I'm the Chief Strategist at Veza, and joining me today is our CEO and co-founder, Tarun Thakur.
Hi, Rich. How are you, man?
Doing great, doing great. Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit about the latest, the latest Microsoft breach. It made some pretty big news, and just for folks who haven't been following, what happened was that there was an attack sponsored by Nobelium or Midnight Blizzard, which is the Russian intelligence service backed hacking group, and it was interesting just to sort of profile it. And Microsoft actually did a nice job of talking about it in one of their blog posts, but they started
That's
in with
right.
a password. Yeah, exactly. With a password spray attack into a test environment. And what happened though is they didn't have MFA enabled on that test environment, and they were actually able to compromise and get a hold of a legacy OAuth application. With that OAuth application, they were able to create a couple different OAuth applications, pivot, and actually get access into the full Microsoft corporate environment, created a new user, went through a consent flow to actually get that get some pretty high permissions to that into Exchange, and ended up through this compromised elevated privilege OAuth application access to essentially all the corporate mailboxes within Microsoft. So it's a pretty big deal, and some really interesting aspects to that we want to talk about. And Tarun, if you want to talk a little bit more about sort of like some of the implications of that attack and how it all went down.
Absolutely, Rich. Absolutely. So three things, as we sort of figure out, to highlight about the event and things to take away from what we've learned and observed. Number one, it was to do with a highly high privileged, I would say, permission, which was at the root of this attack, right? Auth app, somebody gets access to it, which is to do with credentials and identity. Um, and once you get access to that app, what can you do in that app is actually codified in permissions, right? So the number two, which is things to note here, is just because you know what we have been also sort of have a point of view that it is the permissions that is the truest form of identity, is this lack of visibility around those permissions, right? Who can take what action on that was just not there. I'm sure if there was a system in place um, that could have helped the organization, in this case Microsoft, knowing who has access to that OAuth app and is there drift happening in that access and permissions, it could have been a lot more powerful setting rules and monitoring. Now, the third thing to note is specifically around that permission. uh, Rich, why don't you dive into that permission specific that we discussed, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, it was actually getting to into application impersonation. This sort of role across Microsoft, and specifically it was the EWS Exchange Web Services access as all access as user dot all permission, which essentially allows impersonation of a user across and get access to any of these mailboxes. And so there's also another one where they had access similarly, and it was actually drawing the parallel over to the Okta breach, and that was interesting because that similarly gave access to really creating new users, but that was through inbound federation. So I think the common thread here that I wanted to draw between the Microsoft and this Okta breach that then hit MGM and a number of other providers was that they're really going in and elevating privilege with some really convoluted and pretty complex flows that aren't the typical thing of just create a new administrator. They're going off through OAuth applications, elevating privileges, getting consent to those OAuth apps, or you know, leveraging these kind of lesser known IDP identity provider features around things like inbound federation and the org-to-org connector in Okta. You really, it's getting into some of the nuances. The attackers are really demonstrating a high level of sophistication and how all these flows really work.
That's exactly right. I think I would say one more thing to that we noted as we kept sort of reviewing is to the point Rich said, Rich shared, access as user dot all. If you think about that permission, what is that permission supposed to mean, right? That permission to a lame, to a naked eye probably doesn't mean much. And similarly, role, that role name had no meaning. Thereby, understanding these things is becoming very, very critical. Because it is identity is the perimeter of attack. Right? Identity is is the largest attack surface. And the last thing I would say is, there's another thing to note that we did was service accounts and service principals, right? Not just human identities and users. OAuth being an app having a service account associated with it, and that service account gets elevated access as Rich shared. It becomes very, very critical to understand especially for these traditional classic legacy apps which get connected to the corporate modern environment, right? So, okay, so I think building on that, if we dive a little bit into sort of our point of view and how Veza can help here is sort of just three key things to note. Rich, you want to kick off, and I'll follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to note is really getting to the granular level of permissions, right? These things were individual permissions, not well known, but they had really tremendous impact. And so I think that's one thing that really stands out with Veza is going deep into these applications, not staying at the high level permissions around groups and roles, but really getting into that granularity, I think gives a tremendous amount of power. The second thing I'll point to is the fact that Veza provides us capability to see permissions across all different types of systems, structured data systems, unstructured data systems, SaaS applications, custom applications, even on-premise applications. Across this whole breadth, it really provides the full picture, and being able to do all those different types of systems, apps, and platforms really provides a really powerful 360 view into permissions. Tarun, any other things that you add that you think?
You know how much I love. I call it the elephant in the room. Internally we talk elephant in the room. Elephant in the cybersecurity room is the identity, right? Which is our point of view is we believe helping organizations understand who can take what action on what data, which is the biggest cybersecurity's biggest challenge. We secured the network, we have secured the apps. A lot of work has been done on cloud security, and for the next decade, we think it's all about sort of securing the identities now, which is back to Veza, how it can help. All the things Rich talked about, having that data model, tying it system specific permissions to identities, transforming them into English language, business language for business users. Making it applicable to both cloud and on-prem. In this case, it was an OAuth app. Which Veza, from very early days, we not only built for cloud, but also for on-prem systems, not only for databases, but for apps. And the third most important is not just humans in the cloud. Every identity is a machine identity. Every identity is a privileged identity, right? So we're building with that first principles mindset, which today products today and the products to go forward. We believe we can be very helpful in attacks like this, lateral movement, access creep, privilege drift. We're very excited with this problem space. Rich, back to you.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'd add is also the ability to provide a risk score, because this addresses one of the things that I hear about from security providers and operators all the time is they're just overwhelmed with all these things to do, with all these alerts. There's too much to really handle, whether it's vulnerabilities, whether it's notifications from a different system. And I think one of the really powerful things about Veza is providing a risk score that really quantifies the amount of privilege, gives you a really great way to prioritize all the other different security signals that you're seeing based on the potential impact, based on the potential blast radius of what's going to happen if that isn't resolved. And so it really gives you a punch list and allows you to order that punch list. So you can't handle all 10,000 things that are coming in through your security tool or your whatever monitoring system you're using. This gives you a way to really put a very good line on which do I need to do first.
Absolutely. We just Rich and I were with a very large organization here earlier in the week, and they were like, this risk score that Veza can demonstrate with an identity is very, very powerful for them. Back to metric, operating with metrics, measure what matters, right? Is that overprivileged access score is very, very powerful concept. So I know we're running out of time here in this rapid response series. Quickly, just to bring it home. Look, we have this point of view internally. Identity has been very fragmented. Identity access, identity governance, privilege access, very newer frontiers of identity posture, identity threat, identity SecOps. There's a lot that is moving at a very rapid pace. We believe identity access needs a next act. The next big challenge to help make this world a little bit of a safer place is securing identities. and we believe the way to go do that is going back to the Microsoft attack. Monitor the permissions that are associated with these applications, with these systems, associate those permissions to identities, create a baseline of who has access to what, and monitor that baseline. That we believe is the true north of visibility intelligence monitoring. And very excited for this space, because we think we have a small, we can make a small impact in this to make this world a better, safer place. Chris, you want to close it?
It's a scary time, but it's also an exciting time. I think identity has a bright future, because it's the common point where I think we're going to see a lot more of these breaches come down to the question of identity, and I think we can really help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rich. Really great work, and love doing this with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tarun.